First of all, thanks to Yamini and the Accountability Initiative for inviting me. Um, I don't know, I'm not a great expert on devolution or fiscal matters or whatever, and also I don't like to be put on the spot as a government representative of this. So I'm going to be speaking as much as someone who's trying to think through these things with all of you as advocating or articulating some formal government position. Um, you should know by now that in India there are so many positions that it's part of what makes these things so interesting in India. Let me outline, make my remarks in kind of two categories: some background, general thoughts, and then some sense of the challenges going forward. I mean, I do think I arrived here in this job at the time the 14th Finance Commission actually submitted its draft report, and in the first economic survey that we wrote last year, and thanks to some great work done by my colleagues who are here, Kapil, Zubair, and others, we actually plunged into understanding this. And I do think that if you look back at the history of Indian political and economic evolution, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate or sound overly dramatic, but I do think that the 14th Finance Commission will represent a kind of watershed. And let me say, just as a thought, if you think about what is happening since 1980 in India, or maybe even before, it's been a story of progressive decentralization, political and economic decentralization. And I would argue that the one kind of something that happened that kind of defied this trend, as it were, was in fact what happened with the massive re-centralization, fiscal re-centralization that took place under the thing of the CSS, the centralists. In some sense, I think that was an aberration to a more broader and deeper trend towards decentralization. The whole CSS, UPA initiatives kind of pulled that back, and then the 14th Finance Commission came and actually kind of pushed back on that. And so in some sense, you could argue that this is the more normal trend, and that was the aberration. But even so, by reversing what had been happening for the previous 10 years, it did represent a massive watershed. And of course, the watershed, I mean, people forget that it happened on both the tax and the expenditure side of this. On the tax side, because a huge 10% more of basically untied grants were being handed over to the states. But on the expenditure side, because a consequence of giving so much over is that there has to be some pruning and rationalization of these centrally sponsored schemes, so that much more. So I would argue that more autonomy was being given to the states, both on the tax, on the expenditure side. And why I think it's so important is because it really does play into this new era of, I mean, what the government has been and what the Prime Minister has been articulating is this new era of both cooperative and competitive federalism in India. So in a sense, the 14th Finance Commission gives full and freer play to cooperative and competitive federalism. I think that we've also looked at broad categories of social spending, and our analysis suggests that if we look at health, education, agriculture, and rural development, in all these sectors as well, real spending by the states has increased substantially. How much exactly we still need to work out, but there has been an increase. I say that because I do think one of the tensions here is that, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, is in terms of social sectors, the government gets asked, how much have you done? But the government's natural and understandable response is, well, we forked over 10% of the total pool over to the states. So now it's much more with the states. And I think so therefore monitoring what happens at the level of the states is very important. And I think at least the preliminary analysis suggests that that social spending is increasing at the level of the states as well. Now, what do I see as the challenges going forward? I mean, I would say there are, 2 or 3 big challenges, and that's why, I really am. By the way, Yamini, we got only one of the 2 presentations because we were I was very keen to see what the Karnataka thing was, Panchayat, which yeah. So let me tell you one really big challenge and something that Yamini highlighted. I mean, we forget that there are 3 tiers of government in India, and the whole 14th Finance Commission thing is all about center and states. Raja Chelaya, I think, famously said that everyone believes in decentralization, but only up to his level. I think that there is a lot of truth to that, and Yamini, I don't know whether it was a slip or whether it was deliberate. I mean, you only mentioned the panchayats. I mean, if you look at the 3rd tier, there is this whole, city, urban component to that which we forget, and especially if you think that India is urbanizing is going to happen. I do think that, and here, I mean, let's be honest about this. That Raja Chelaya incentive is at the heart of this, right? I mean, you want to preserve power and not want to devolve it further. And honestly, I think how you crack that political economy is going to determine how that 3rd tier problem is addressed. I had just one thought. I mean, this is I'm just thinking aloud. I had one thought, which is that there is a new opportunity that's been created for thinking much harder and much more seriously about that, which is the smart cities idea of the government. I think if you can somehow dovetail all the these kind of urbanization issues, we know that having effective cities requires a degree of accountability and fiscal resources, and the 2 go hand in hand. We know that is very important for making the smart cities thing successful. So I think we need to think much more about how we're going to achieve that going forward, because otherwise, because remember, my understanding is that the devolution that needs to take place from the states to the 3rd tier via state finance commissions. I mean, many states have not even set up their finance commissions. God knows, when their findings will come in. God knows how they will be acted upon. So just the politics of that, and I think so. I think I would request, and that's why I'm so interested in the Karnataka thing. Shining the spotlight much more on state finance commissions and what they do and how they do it. I think that's going to be a really I would think that is a big research agenda item going forward that I would urge all of you to focus on. So the second challenge is, I think, again, something that Yamini you alluded to, and you also, Venu, that I think there is this, I would call this almost like an ideological tension. You put it in terms of the states saying, "Oh, give us more freedom," and then once they get the freedom, they say, "But we wanted the other thing as well." I think the ideological tension manifests itself in a different way, also in another way, which I think, and I want to be as cautious as possible. I think this is an ideological tension that all of us, on the one hand, we believe in greater decentralization, but on the other hand, some of us also think that our priorities are so important that it has to be pushed by the center. And that was the thing that went into the CSS schemes as well, that and that was true of civil society especially, but also others said, we think education is very important, and everyone has his pet agenda, and then you say, but so I think there is this tension, and this will always exist, and I think we should just be aware of this tension, and I say this especially to members of civil society, that think about the consequence of when you say education is very important, and therefore the center should push it. I don't want to take any position on any of these as a good government official, but I think that but I think we should be self-aware of especially in ideological terms, we should be very aware of that. Now, so I think going forward, I think there are what I would call the kind of the top-down capacity building issues and the bottoms-up kind of accountability type. I think that's going to be the the way forward on this.